The time has finally come. June is bringing us some of the biggest books from DC and Marvel in the form of Justice League, Immortal Hulk, and more. Let's take a look at what we got. I'm Stan, and this is Detail Comics. What's up, everybody, and welcome to Preview Picks, a show where I go over the comic books that are coming out on Wednesday, give you an idea what they're all about, and whether there's something you should talk to your comic book shop about or not. Make sure you subscribe to get more of these every single Monday. The first book that I want to talk about is Astonishing X-Men number 12, which is the last part of Charles Soule's run on the storyline and the end of the Man Named X storyline. So this is going to be before Matthew Rosenberg becomes the new writer for Astonishing X-Men and goes in a completely different direction with a different lineup of mutants. So if you've been following along with Astonishing X-Men, this is your last chance to get a little bit more of that Charles Soule storyline. Then heading over to DC, we have Deathstroke number 32, where we actually get the Deathstroke versus Batman storyline, which is dealing with who is the father of Damian Wayne. So over the last few issues, we've had a few different kind of misleading aspects that are going to kind of lead us to think that Slade Wilson is actually going to end up being the father of Damian Wayne. But as of right now, there's still at least 3 more parts to go, so I'm not necessarily sure exactly who's going to come out on top on this one, or if you're actually on top if you end up being Damian's father. Over at Dark Horse, we have a continuation of the Black Hammer universe with Dr. Starr and the Kingdom of Lost Tomorrows. Issue number 4 comes out, and this is going to help fulfill and flesh out a little bit more of the Black Hammer universe. Jeff Lemire and Dina Ormston, as well as the variety of other artists that they've really been working with in order to kind of create these offshoot series that are enhancing the Black Hammer universe, and doing a very good job. And Dr. Starr has been a different kind of emotional ride for a lot of different people that are fans of Black Hammer. So it's one that I recommend. It might not necessarily be for everybody, though, and they're kind of focusing on individual miniseries rather than kind of perpetuating the Black Hammer universe, but I've always been a big fan of Black Hammer, and that's a book that I'm going to have to recommend for people that also like it. Marvel's big summer event, Infinity Wars, is coming, but Infinity Countdown has to continue, and we've got issue number 4 coming out, which is going to continue the story of Infinity Countdown. And I'm not going to lie to you guys, I really don't care at this point in time. There's so much stuff going on with the Infinity Stones that it just doesn't really interest me much at all anymore. However, I am interested in Batman Prelude to the Wedding, Nightwing vs. Hush, number 1. So this is, again, another one-shot that's dealing with the situation like Damian versus his grandfather Ra's al Ghul in the last issue. And this one shows Clark, Dick Grayson, and Batman at a bachelor party kind of thing, and they go to a bat burger. So it's a weird kind of take on this situation, and then Hush comes coming in, and I don't necessarily know what's going on, and all these stories deal with different aspects of what these characters are really experiencing as Batman goes to get married to Catwoman. So it's not necessarily going to be Bruce marrying Selina, it's going to be Batman marrying Catwoman, and we don't necessarily know if that's even going to happen, but they're all dealing with this in their own way. So they're doing some mental gymnastics, or literal gymnastics, or combat, or fighting, or whatever they really need to do to come to terms with this whole marriage and what it really means to these individual characters. So it makes for some interesting, introspective moments. So I'm excited to see where this one kind of goes with those. Headed over to Image, we get Rick Remender's Death or Glory number 2 with art by Bangle, and overall, issue number 1 was a very good looking book. It seemed a little bit light on the story up until we get to the end, where we actually find out what Glory is smuggling, or what she hijacked, this thing that was supposed to be worth so much money that was going to help save the father figure that she had. So I'm excited to see where this one goes as she kind of gets a little bit out of her depth in all these different situations. But Death or Glory is one that it might not necessarily be in the same vein as like Tokyo Ghost or Seven to Eternity or Deadly Class or Black Science or other Rick Remender stories, but it's a different take on it, and I'm excited to see where it goes, and Bangle's art has just been fantastic. Also, you're going to want to take a look at the variant cover for this one, just because it looks so cool in comparison to the standard one. They've just got a really good art style when it comes to these characters, covers, and the overall creation. Back in Marvel, we have Captain America number 703, which continues the storyline of the great-grandson, I believe, of Captain America, Steve Rogers. So as he's kind of trying to take on this Kree-infested government and save the people, it's just a really... It's not a Steve Rogers story. It's about the legacy of Steve Rogers. It's about the legacy of Captain America. It's about what kind of future he can create, or what kind of future can be inspired by him, and whether that message endures the way that we expect it to. Well, here's hoping that it does as he comes to the final conclusion. I believe there's this issue as well as 704 before we get Ta-Nehisi Coates' brand new Captain America number 1, which is going to be happening July 4th. So if you like this, this is really your last shot to get in on the Mark Waid Captain America that's been running for the last few weeks and months. Another book in the same vein as Death or Glory is Isola. So this is very much a Miyazaki-inspired style of art, and the story seems to be of some sort of Bengal tiger-esque kind of creature that was a transformed princess or queen or something along those lines that's being guided by a former soldier. We're not necessarily sure. I'm not 100% sure exactly what's going on with the storyline because they haven't really told me yet. They've been insinuating and kind of circling this issue for quite some time, but you can't deny that the art, if you really like that kind of really soft anime style, it's just a really good, appealing book as far as the art style is concerned, and the storyline continues to build to become more and more influential and important when it comes to the actual characters inside the book. So it's one that I'm keeping my eyes on. It's not necessarily a book that I'd recommend for individual issues at this point. It might be a book that reads a little bit better in trade, so keep that in mind. Then, continuing on with The Hunt for Wolverine, we get Weapon Loss number 2, which continues the story of our Inhuman detective, Misty Knight, as well as Daredevil, as they kind of try to track down Logan. And they found that he is pretty much everywhere. He's in the tabloids, he's had babies. He's just one of those characters that everybody loves to spring into everything regardless of what he's actually doing. And that's actually really indicative of 90s comics. You know, like Logan was on every single team and in every single book, and it was just like, hey, do we need to sell a couple extra thousand issues? Let's just throw some Wolverine in it. And that's kind of a real interesting perspective on this. If you want to get people's attention, you put Wolverine in it, and that's what Weapon Loss is really about. It's about a detective story combing through all of this chaff and making sure that you know exactly where he is and what you can do to find him. However, since Charles Soule's writing this, and he's also writing Dead Ends, which comes out in August, does it really lead to the conclusion that we want? And that's the interesting thing about it. So I'm going to be following along, but it might not necessarily be for everybody, and I can totally understand if you guys don't want to buy these Hunt for Wolverine books anymore, because it could probably get overwhelming real fast. However, if you want to stick with an X-Men type title, you should go to X-Men Red number 5, which is continuing a really strong story by Tom Taylor and Mahmoud Asrar on art. This is where we're dealing with a bit more Namor. We're getting back to a bit more Atlantis. There's a lot of really cool stuff that's happening in X-Men Red, and it's one of the best books out there if you're talking about traditional X-Men style. Not necessarily traditional if you're talking about like 80s or 90s comics, but you're talking about commentary on society at large. It's got a good art style, and the resurrection of Jean Grey and how she's actually fitting into this world is a really interesting portrayal. Overall, I've been a fan of it. It does have some pretty strong messages, so if you're trying to avoid things that are relatively intensive when it comes to politics, it might not necessarily be for you, but I find it really entertaining, and it makes you think a little bit, which is what a comic book should. Of course, before we dive into new number ones, we gotta hit the big continuing books that are coming out. Man of Steel number 2 from Brian Michael Bendis is going to be hitting store shelves, and that is going to be a really telling piece. We got an interesting start, you know, a relatively Clark-esque voice when it comes to Superman, some interesting uses of Superman's powers, a relatively odd kind of sense when it comes to how he is relating to the rest of the world. It makes him feel a little bit more real and yet a little bit less like Superman, and then the overall relationship of John Kent, Lois Lane, and Clark Kent, and exactly what happens to split them apart is probably what I really want to know about. It's definitely really what I want to know about, but I don't necessarily know if Brian Michael Bendis is going to be giving us that anytime soon. But Man of Steel number 2 is going to be continuing his miniseries, and it's Brian Michael Bendis getting his feet wet when it comes to Superman before he takes over the main titles in July. Also continuing from DC, we've got Batman number 48, which has got this really cool variant cover by Frank Cho. It doesn't necessarily show any kind of colors on this cover, so I'm wondering whether it's actually going to show up in black or white, but DC's been doing a fantastic job showcasing their variants. But this is bringing the Joker back into play when it comes into Batman's life, because he found out about the wedding between Batman and Catwoman, and he's invited, or at least he's invited himself, as we saw in DC Nation number 0. So anytime that you bring the Joker into a Batman story, it's going to be interesting, especially since we've seen Tom King kind of evolve his characters over time. So since the War of Jokes and Riddles was so far back in Batman's history, and now the Joker has had some time to become a little bit more psychotic, deranged, and unhinged, as we actually saw inside DC Nation number 0, it's going to be interesting to see exactly how he interacts with the Bat and the Cat before the wedding. Then we can jump into new number ones. So we have The Unexpected from Steve Orlando, which continues DC's Dark Knight's Metal, and it's the last issue that's really going to debut in this overall series. I have been losing more and more interest when it comes to these, simply because the marketing plan has been okay when it comes to it. The performance of the books has been okay. Nothing really stellar or standout. Sideways has done a pretty good job with the character. Damage has done an okay job with the character. The Terrifics has easily been one of the best, if not the best book out of DC's New Age of Heroes. And The Unexpected just brings us a little bit more of this kind of thrown together team of various people that we don't necessarily have a lot of history about. So it's one of those books that I approach with caution. I'm going to be picking it up just like I picked up New Chapter challengers before this, just to see exactly what's going on, but I can't guarantee that I'm going to be picking it up in the long term. Also, in new number ones, we have Marvel doing a double dipping on Ant-Man and the Wasp. So we have Ant-Man and the Wasp number 1, which is dealing with Scott Lang and Nadia Pym, and it appears to be a relatively independent storyline compared to Ant-Man and the Wasp Living Legends number 1, which is also coming out this week, which deals with Scott Lang and Janet Van Dyne. So, with the movie coming out in a month, of course they're going to want to have as much Ant-Man and as much the Wasp as they possibly can on store shelves, so that way people looking for those characters after they see the movie, or at least mildly interested in those characters, can find something that's easy to jump into. However, with the characters that are currently in these books, they're not necessarily relatable to the films. Not in the capacity that they're being shown, but for us as individuals, it could be okay. You know, depending on how they characterize Scott Lang, Nadia Pym has proven herself to be a relatively capable individual, a member of the Avengers and various other teams, and then of course Janet Van Dyne is a favorite amongst a lot of Marvel people, just because she's such a really cool founding character. I'm excited, but I'm not. I feel like Marvel's just like, hey, we're going to take your money right now, and they're not necessarily going to be offering me everything that I really want out of a characterization, everything that I want out of a comic book, but these are just miniseries, so they're not necessarily intended to go on for any kind of long term. Your mileage might vary on these one. Approach with caution, but I want to let you know that they're out there. Another new number 1 from Marvel is Dazzler X Song number 1, which is a one-shot, so this is dealing with Dazzler. I'm not necessarily sure what to say about that. In the preview that I saw on Previews World, there's a couple previews that are out there. It looks like it's a club for people that are different and that want to go and have a good time. And I'm all about people having a good time. It's not necessarily something I'm going to read, but if you want to check it out, it looks interesting. However, after we're past those, we can talk about the four big bad books that are coming out this week that are really going to be knocking people's socks off. Number 1, Doctor Strange number 1 from Mark Waid. We're going to be seeing the good doctor in the hands of Mark Waid heading out into space. He's dealing with all kinds of different things, and based on the preview that I saw, he's battling some sort of elder god and stitching up the universe like he's a surgeon. So it's going to be a very different take than Jason Aaron, and a very different take from Donny Cates, who really approached the good doctor in their own way. And Mark Waid has got some classic storylines under his belt. It'd be interesting to see exactly what he does with the character and how big a factor space is and how he puts Doctor Strange into space. It feels weird. It feels like he should be some sort of dimension knot or something along those lines, slipping between parallel dimensions. However, this seems to be the next best thing. I'm excited. I'm a little bit hesitant, but I am excited for this one. The other one that I want to talk about is Deadpool number 1. Skottie Young is going to be taking over, and he's got a very different writing style compared to Jerry Dugan, who just put in like hundreds of issues of Deadpool. So it's I'm not necessarily sure, because I didn't read Deadpool a lot. Skottie Young's got a really interesting style when it comes to his art, and his writing is in that same kind of vein. I just want to make sure that he's got the characterization of Deadpool right, and I just want to make sure it continues on in that fun yet merciless mercenary that we really knew and loved from Jerry Dugan's run on the book. But I'm excited to see where this one goes, because it has a lot of potential that I really wanted to tap into. Then the big book from DC is Justice League number 1, so we get Scott Snyder teaming up with Jim Chuggan for issue number 1, and we get the brand new team that they've got going on. So you've got your Wonder Woman, your Superman, your Batman, your Aquaman, you've got Martian Manhunter, you've got Hawkgirl, you've got Cyborg. There's a variety of different characters that are going to be adding up into this Justice League, and they're going to be taking on things in a very different way. They're in Hall of Justice, which is what we saw in Justice League No Justice number 4. There are so many different things that are going to be kicking off, like Justice League Dark and Justice League Odyssey. This is going to be the main book. There's a lot invested in making sure that this is the most successful book that they can possibly put out with some of the biggest names in DC Comics. So I'm really anticipating some phenomenal work from these guys, because Brian Hitch's job on it was lackluster, to say the best, when it comes to those things. But Justice League number 1 I feel is going to hit rock solid. But the big number 1 for me is Immortal Hulk number 1 from Al Ewing and Joe Bennett, which is going to be taking this kind of twisted horror look at Bruce Banner. And it's just like, the monster comes out at night. Bruce Banner might be the man during the day, but because of the lack of control, how many times he's been resurrected, what the real story is behind the Immortal Hulk, this is going to be a very different kind of take, and it's going to go back to the roots of the Hulk as kind of the monster inside the man, and how that plays on his psyche, how he impacts the world around him, whether he knows it or not. Bruce Banner is not necessarily in control. He is not conscious of these things, and the Hulk has a very different developed personality, as we saw in Avengers No Surrender, when he had intelligent and resourceful retorts for a lot of different people. As he was going up against Wonder Man, he was fierce and menacing. He was calling people out on their bullshit, which is a really interesting concept for the Hulk. I'm really amped for Immortal Hulk #1. I'm super amped. I'm like gamma level amped. So I want to know what you guys think and what your interesting comic is for this week. So hit me up in the comments down below and we can start that conversation. As always, if you like what you see, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to get more news, reviews, and commentary on comic books, comic book movies, comic book TV shows and games, and anything and everything inside the world of comics.